All right, today we are going to continue our discussion on different scales. And we are also going to be going over a question that I get all the time. Probably one of the most asked questions that I get in emails is somebody will write and say, well, I have such and such doll. What scale is she? Well, I don't know, but I'm going to show you how to figure it out. I have a bunch of different dolls here that I can use as an example. I've borrowed some. I found some in the closet, and we've just been digging them out from all over the last few days. And I am going to show you what key measurements you can take to figure out what scale the doll you have is and what scale you need to build things in if you want to make a dollhouse for any doll that you've got. So let me get set up with the ruler and let's get started. Let's start with the Fisher-Price people. These are pretty standard. They're the dollhouse family that I use a lot for sizing things for 1/12 scale because they're pretty accurate as far as 1/12 scale goes. And if you don't understand what I mean by scale or 1/12 scale, check out my other videos on scale, especially the introduction to scale, where I think I described it pretty well. So we need to look at our dolls, and we also need, what else do we need besides our dolls? We need a ruler of some kind, and it might be handy to have a tape measure because you will need to go measure things in your own house too, probably before you're done. All right, so 1/12 scale. Well, I've already measured these, and the first obvious measurement is we need to see how tall they are. This guy here, he's 5 3/4 of an inch tall. She's about 5 1/2. The little boy's 4, and the toddler, I'm going to refer to her as a toddler, is 3 1/2. And those will be important things to know. Another important thing to know when you have a doll, say you only had this one. Well, you need to look at that doll and make the determination. Is it a child or is it an adult? Because that will make a difference. They live in the same world, but Dad is quite a bit taller. He's, 1 3/4, almost 2 inches taller than the kid. That makes a difference. So look at your dolls and say, is it an adult or is it a child? And if it's a child, do I want it to be in a normal sized room, or do I want to have like a playroom type room where the furniture is sized to that individual? Another measurement you need to take, there's 2 more really important measurements that I take. I take the measurement from the foot to the knee on each of these dolls. And the knee measurement on these, from the floor to their knee to where their knee bends, and some dolls you'll have to just kind of guess, and we'll see a few of those in a minute, is about 1 1/2 inches. Have you ever thought about why a chair seat is the height it is? If you go measure the chairs in your house, you'll find that most of them are 18 inches off the floor. That's because in the real world, not all, but most adults are 18 inches from the floor to where their knee bends. So I know just by looking at this doll that I'm going to make a chair, the seat of that chair has to be 1 1/2 inches off the floor. That's a key measurement. That helps you determine scale. I also measure where the hips are, because that will give me a little more clue as to what the scale is. Now I measure that and I say, okay, he's an adult. He's 5 3/4 inches tall. This measurement here is 1 1/2 inches. This is an easy one. It's 1 1/2 inches. Okay, so it would mean 1 1/2 inch chair. In real life, a chair is about 18 inches, 1 1/2 inches, 18. Okay, it's 1/12 scale. It's pretty easy to make that obvious of a jump on a doll that's sized like this. Let's move on to another doll size. Okay, I have the Barbie family here now. Barbie is 11 1/2 inches tall, and Ken, he's about 12 inches tall. And we know that they are 1/6 scale, meaning 1 inch equals 6 inches. And that would make him about 6 foot tall, and her a little over 5 feet tall. And we have a couple of kids. We have the Chelsea. She's 5 1/4 inches tall. And Kelly, the toddler, is about 4 inches tall. Now let's take this doll for just a moment. She's 5 1/4. That's pretty close to our dollhouse lady. But we look at them and we say, okay, she's obviously a child. Her proportions are childlike. Her proportions are adult-like. So you make that determination. That's why you need to look and say, is this a child doll or an adult doll? When we look at Barbie and Ken, I'll use Ken here as an example. His knees are about 3 inches off the floor. Actually, I think they're 3 1/2, so they're a little high, but about 3 to 3 1/2. So that tells us what height chair to make. So we know where we need to start with our scale measurements. Once we figure that out, we can convert it to what its relationship is to real life. So let's look at something else. I have an American Girl doll here. Now she's 18 inches tall. Her knees about 4 1/2 inches from the floor. We have to determine, do I want to treat her as a child or as more of a grown size doll? Most people in the doll making world treat her as an adult size and use 1/3 scale as the right scale for this doll. And it works out pretty well. Everything is sized to the doll, and since there's no other dolls, adult dolls to go with her, it works out okay. So again, you measure. If you don't know, measure the height, measure the distance from the floor to the knee, and you've got a good ballpark for your size. Let's go on. Let's go to the other extreme. We've got Polly Pocket. Polly Pocket's only 3 1/2 inches tall, and her knee is about 1 inch from the floor. So that puts her at kind of an odd scale, but I know that I can just size things to this doll. I look at her, she looks probably like a teenager, so she's probably adult size. That's okay. I'll go with that. So I would use that 1 inch measurement here, and I'd go from there, and I would scale everything that way. That 1 inch equals 1.5 feet. I'd get out some paper and pencil, and I'd start doing some math. She's kind of in between standard scales. That's okay. Doesn't matter. She can be whatever she is. Now the thing is, when I look at her next to the Fisher-Price toddler, they're virtually the same height, but they're not the same scale because she's more grown up than she is. She's a child. She's not. That's why you have to ask yourself that question early on. Is it a child doll or an adult doll? Okay, let's move on. This is another really different doll. She is 9 inches tall, and her knee is about 2 1/2 inches from the floor. So I could use that measurement, and I could make a whole room to go around her. I don't think I will, but I could. By using that measurement, that gives me the information I need. Let's move on to some more. I have this little fairy doll. She would make she'd be cute in a scene. Now this one you can do a couple of things with. You can use the measurements. She's 3 1/2 inches tall, and her knee is about 1 inch off the ground. You could scale her room to fit her, or since she's a fairy, you could actually put her in a 1/12 scale or even larger. And it would look just fine because it's more fantasy. You've got a little more leeway when you're working more in fantasy because who knows what size they are. We've got one more example and then I'll talk about something else. Now these fun little guys, they sit in my kitchen window, so I'm not going to make a scene for them. But I did decide to pull them in for this. They're 5 inches tall, which puts them pretty close to 1 inch scale. But because they're so much rounder, they may or may not work in a 1 inch scale. Their room would have to be much heavier, much almost chunky compared to the room for her. But it could be done. If I ever wanted to make a kitchen for them, it would be easy to do. Let's talk about one more thing. Crowded screen now. When I'm making food for a doll, I like to have the doll on hand because I don't necessarily measure. I put the food in my hand and then I can put it into the doll's hand. And it won't matter if it's an American Girl or a Polly Pocket. If I have the doll's hand, I can make it look right. It's another thing we need to talk about. As I said, this little chef, let me get this one out of the way because she's taking up a lot of real estate here. These two are pretty close to the same height, but he's visually much heavier than she is. That's why sometimes when you measure for scale, even though it's precisely measured, it doesn't look right. Because the weight, the visual weight of what you're making has to play a factor too. We've really just scratched the surface on scale. So keep coming back. If you haven't seen the other scale videos, take a look. Hopefully you've learned something here, and we'll add to it next time. I'll talk to you later. Bye.